I stood at the stove, waiting for the kettle to whistle. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock and the sound of rain tapping gently on the kitchen window. It was 3:30, and in about 30 minutes, Fable would come through the front door with the kids, backpacks swinging, voices loud. They never walked in quietly, not once in all the years they'd lived here. I reached up to the cupboard and pulled down my favorite mug, the one with faded roses that Albert gave me for our 20th anniversary 18 years ago. The same year he passed right there at his desk in the county tax office. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been taken for granted by the people you love most. My name is Elaine Merritt. I'm 62 years old, and for most of my life, I lived by 3 rules. Treat people with decency, keep a roof over your head, and never borrow what you can't repay. Albert and I stuck to those rules through 4 decades of marriage. We raised one daughter, Fable. She was a bright child, always had a story to tell, always wanted to be the center of the room. When she got older, she wanted a family of her own, and she got 1, 2 children, and a husband who walked out when the youngest was still in diapers. When she came to me with red eyes and a folder full of pay stubs asking if I'd co-sign a mortgage for a modest 3-bedroom, I said yes, of course I did. The down payment came from my savings, $45,000 to be exact. She promised it was just temporary. She'd get back on her feet in a year, maybe 2. I moved in to help with the kids, told myself it was only for a while. 4 years later, I was still paying half the mortgage, half the utilities, and all of the internet cable and extras. The kids were loud and good-hearted, but they were used to getting what they asked for. Snacks, sports games, new backpacks every fall. Fable's job as a mail carrier brought in enough to cover groceries, gas clothes, but every month there was something else, a car repair, a medical bill, a new laptop for school, and each time it landed in front of me like a new envelope on the table marked urgent. I never said no, not really. But last week, she sat across from me at this very table and said something I hadn't expected. Not even after all these years, she wanted my entire pension, all $1,400 a month. She offered me $100 for personal expenses, told me it was only fair since she was the one supporting the house and the kids. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I stood up, went to my bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and began to pack. When I reached the front door, she followed me begging, asking me to be reasonable. Then she said something else, something cold. She reminded me that the house was half hers, and that if I didn't want to hand over my money, I'd need to find somewhere else to live. I didn't say a word. I just kept walking, and when I reached the end of the block, I stopped in front of Humphrey Bardwell's house. He'd lived across the street for as long as I could remember. His wife, Martha, passed 2 years ago. And every morning since I'd seen him watering the lawn or sweeping the porch. We weren't close. Not really, but when he opened the door and saw the suitcase in my hand, he didn't ask questions. He just stepped aside and said, "Come in." Humphrey carried my suitcase to the guest room, without asking why I'd shown up on his porch at dusk with a packed bag. The room was small and simple, with white curtains that looked like they'd been sewn by Martha before she passed. The bed was made the closet empty, except for a folded quilt and a stack of towels. He showed me where the bathroom was said to let him know if I needed anything, and then he left me alone. That night, I turned off my phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. I didn't need to read the messages to know what they said. I had the same pattern memorized. First, the demands, then the guilt, then the tears about the children. It had played out so many times in person that I could hear her voice even in silence. In the morning, the rain was still tapping at the windows when I came downstairs. Humphrey was already in the kitchen, standing over the stove in a worn robe. He asked if I wanted coffee or tea, offered me eggs, and we sat at the table like two people who had done this before. Across the street, the lights in my house were already on. I imagined Fable pacing the kitchen with a calculator in one hand and the phone in the other. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. By mid-morning, I'd called the bank, the gas company, the electric company, the internet provider. One by one, I canceled every automatic withdrawal tied to my accounts. The mortgage, the bills, everything. The agents were polite, asked if I was sure, reminded me there would be late fees. I told them I understood. The phone rang again and again. I let it. But at 8 o'clock that night, I picked up. Fable's voice came through, tired and irritated. "Mom," she said, "the mortgage didn't go through. The bank called. They said your payment bounced or something. I told her it didn't bounce. I canceled it." There was a pause. Then, "Why would you do that? That's not just your decision." I reminded her it was my account, my pension. She started raising her voice, listing all the things that would go unpaid: the gas, the lights, the internet. I listened. She said the kids needed the internet for school, that Lauren had cried when she couldn't watch her tablet, that Denby had yelled at her for not having answers. I didn't argue. I didn't yell back. I told her calmly that if she wanted to take over the finances as she'd said, then she could pay the bills. They were in her name anyway. I would no longer be the safety net. The line went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was different, quieter, more unsure. "I can't afford it, Mom. I have $300 to last us 2 weeks. That's not enough. I don't know what to do." I told her she had a job, a salary, that she'd figure it out. She tried again, this time with tears. "Lauren asked about you last night. She kept saying she didn't understand why Grandma wasn't home." "What do I tell her?" "Tell her I love her," I said, "and that I'll see her soon." I ended the call before she could say more. The next few days were quiet. Humphrey and I settled into a kind of rhythm. He'd make breakfast, I'd make dinner. He watered the garden in the mornings while I sat on the porch and read. We took turns buying groceries. We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about family. And that in itself felt like relief. From the guest room, I could see my house. The lights stayed on late the first few nights. On Wednesday, I watched Fable haul 2 large trash bags out to the curb, then stand beside them for several minutes. I saw her shoulders sag. On Thursday, a man in a dented pickup arrived. Together, they carried out the oversized TV and DVD player. She was starting to sell things. That much was clear. On Friday morning, as I stood by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, I heard a soft knock at the back door. When I opened it, I saw Lauren dressed for school, a backpack on her shoulders, and a bunch of dandelions in her hand. "Grandma," she said, breathless. "I knew you were here. Mom said you went to Aunt Emily's, but we don't have an Aunt Emily." She threw her arms around my waist and hugged me tight. I held her close. She looked up at me, eyes wide. "Are you coming home soon? Denby misses you too." "He just won't say it." I crouched down to her level. "I'll see you soon, sweetheart. I promise." She glanced back at the street. "Mom cries at night. She thinks I don't know, but I do. And Denby gets real mad. Yesterday he yelled at me for taking his pen." I touched her cheek gently. "Things are just a little hard right now. But they'll get better." She nodded. Then she held out the flowers. "These are for you." I picked them on the way to school. I thanked her and promised I'd talk to her mom that evening. After she left, I placed the dandelions in a glass of water. Humphrey came into the kitchen and raised an eyebrow. "Family diplomacy?" he asked, glancing at the flowers. I said nothing, but I understood what he meant. You have to hold your ground, he said, pouring himself a second cup of coffee. Otherwise, you'll end up right where you started. I nodded. That afternoon passed slowly. I tried to read, helped Humphrey trim the hedges, swept the porch. But my mind kept drifting back to what I would say that night, what I needed to hear, what I was and wasn't willing to do. At 8 o'clock sharp, I walked up the steps to my own front door and knocked. Fable answered almost instantly. She looked tired, older somehow, like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled back, her jeans were worn, and the house behind her was cleaner than I'd seen it in months. The TV was off. The kids were sitting quietly in the living room. Lauren jumped up when she saw me and hugged me again. Grandma, we made cookies and pie. Denby gave a small wave from the sofa. Hi, Grandma. Hi, sweetheart, I said. How's school? He shrugged. It's okay. But we don't have internet. I have to go to Jason's to do homework. I know. That'll change soon. Fable looked at me and motioned toward the kitchen. Can we talk? We stepped inside and closed the door behind us. The table was set. My favorite mug with roses sat waiting. The smell of cinnamon and apples hung in the air. She poured the tea without a word. Then she looked up and said, Thank you for coming. I nodded and took a sip, waiting. She glanced toward the door, then back at me. I was wrong, she said, about a lot of things. I waited to see if she'd say what needed to be said, and slowly she began. Fable sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. The tea had gone cold. The pie sat untouched on the counter, a warm smell of cinnamon still in the air, but neither of us moved. She kept her eyes down for a moment, then lifted them slowly. I was wrong, she said again. I shouldn't have said the things I did, and I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. I waited. She needed to say the words for herself, not for me. I got too used to you helping with everything she said. Somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about what it was costing you. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a school notebook, flipping to a page filled with handwritten columns. I spent the whole week trying to figure out where the money goes. The truth is, I don't even make enough to cover everything. Not really. I always thought I did. She tapped her pen against the numbers. Groceries, gas, school stuff, clothes, utilities. It's about $200 or $300 more a month than what I bring home. And that's without the extra things. No dance class, no new shoes, no upgrades. I didn't say anything. I just listened. I've already started cutting things. I canceled cable, sold the big TV, got rid of the DVD player and the box of old movies. There's a guy down the street who'll buy the coffee maker and the old mixer tomorrow. We don't use them anyway. She looked down again, then back up. I even went through the closets. There are coats. We don't wear books no one reads. I posted a few things online. It's not much, but it's something. She paused, then said, I also looked at part-time jobs. Weekends, evenings, food delivery maybe. I saw a cleaning job at an office complex a few blocks away. They only need someone a couple nights a week. I took a sip of tea and nodded. The work she was describing wouldn't be easy, not with 2 kids and a full-time job already on her plate. But the way she spoke was different now. Less defensive. Slower. Thoughtful. I know I used to act like I had it all under control, she said. I didn't. I just didn't want to think about it. It was easier when you covered the rest. She folded the notebook closed and set it between us. I don't want to live like that anymore. We sat in silence for a moment. I reached into my purse and took out a folded sheet of paper. I laid it on the table between us. These are my conditions, I said. If I'm going to be part of this house again, Things have to change. For good. Fable leaned in, reading slowly. Every month, we build a detailed family budget, I said. We write it down. We stick to it. Every expense gets recorded. At the end of the month, we go over it together. She nodded. Second, I said we open a joint account. Not for everything, just for the household. You'll put in $1,200 from your paycheck. I'll put in $1,000 from my pension. That pays for the mortgage, utilities, groceries, school clothes, and anything the kids need for medical or school. What about personal expenses, she asked. You'll keep the rest of your paycheck. I'll keep the rest of my pension. What we do with that money is our business. If you want to save it or spend it, that's up to you. She picked up a pen and started writing. Third, I continued, any purchase over $100 needs to be discussed first. No exceptions. If it's for the house or the kids, we agree before we spend. Okay, she said, still writing. Fourth, I said the kids get a set allowance every week. No extra handouts in between. They need to learn how to manage what they're given. Fable hesitated. They're used to asking when they need something. They'll adjust, I said. They're smart. And it'll be good for them. She nodded again. I looked at her. And last, we respect each other. No ultimatums, no demands, no threats. If something needs to be discussed, we sit down and talk about it calmly. No more shouting across the table. She looked at the list again, reading each point twice. Then she looked up. I agree, she said. To all of it, I mean that. Are you sure, I asked? Yes, she said. I need this. I didn't realize how much. We shook hands across the table, a quiet, steady grip. Then she asked, Where were you this week, at Humphrey Bardwell's? I said, Across the street. Her eyes widened slightly. He's a kind man, I added. He was good to me. She nodded, then stood and went to the cupboard, pulling out the notebook again. I've already started working on next month's budget, she said. I want to show you. We walked back to the living room. Denby looked up from the television and asked, So, is Grandma coming back? I'll be back tomorrow, I said. But we'll be doing things differently, like what Lauren asked. You'll both get a weekly allowance, I said. If you spend it all on Monday, there won't be more until the next week. No extras. Denby raised an eyebrow. Okay, that's fair, I guess. As long as the internet gets turned back on, he added. We'll fix it first thing, Fable said. I picked up my purse. I need to go for tonight, I said, but I'll bring my things in the morning. Lauren ran up and hugged me. We saved pie for you. I'll have a slice tomorrow, sweetheart, I said, smoothing her hair. Fable walked me to the door. She spoke quietly so the kids wouldn't hear. Thank you for giving me a chance to do better, she said. We'll see how it goes, I replied. It won't be easy. It'll work, she said. I nodded, then stepped out into the evening air, feeling the cool shift of something just beginning to settle into place. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The guest room at Humphrey's was still and dim, the curtains pulled tight, and the rain from the night before lingering as mist on the glass. I sat up, slowly, swung my legs over the edge of the bed, and listened. Nothing but the soft tick of the clock on the dresser and the gentle hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I dressed, folded the bedding, and zipped up my suitcase. Humphrey was already in the kitchen when I came down. He'd brewed coffee and sliced a few apples on a plate between us. We didn't talk much, just passed the cream, poured our cups, and ate quietly. Before I left, I thanked him again. He only nodded and said to stop by if I ever needed a calm place to think. The walk home was short. The air smelled of damp leaves and cooling pavement. When I reached the porch, the front door opened before I could knock. Fable stood there in jeans and a clean sweatshirt, her hair brushed back her eyes, still a little tired but focused. She stepped aside to let me in. The living room looked different. The big TV was gone. The coffee table was cleared. A few throw pillows had been fluffed and realigned. The smell of brewed coffee drifted from the kitchen, and there was a notebook and a pen already waiting at the table. "Kids are still asleep," she said, nodding toward the hallway. "I thought we could start before they wake." I brought my suitcase upstairs to my old room. The bed had fresh sheets. The nightstand had been dusted. A small vase with 2 daisies sat near the lamp. Back in the kitchen, Fable opened her notebook. "I went through the last 3 months of bank statements," she said. "Every charge, every bill, every cash withdrawal. I think I've figured out where the gaps are." She slid the notebook toward me. I looked over her notes: grocery totals, gas fill-ups, school supply, costs, a couple lines she'd crossed out with a pen, and scribbled unnecessary beside. There were fewer restaurant visits than I expected. She'd started cutting already. We worked through the numbers together. Mortgage $800, utilities $350, groceries $400, school expenses $100, children's clothing and medical another $150. We totaled it twice, checked the math, then set our monthly shared amount. She would deposit $200. I would add $1,000. Anything beyond that would be handled separately. At 8:30, the children shuffled into the kitchen. Denby looked at the two of us sitting with papers spread out and raised an eyebrow. "Is this about the new rules?" Fable nodded. "We're figuring out our budget. That includes yours." Lauren climbed up on her usual chair and blinked at me. "Do we get allowance?" "Yes," I said. "Each of you will get some money every week. You can save it or spend it, but once it's gone, that's it until the next week." Denby nodded, like he already understood the trade-off. Lauren asked how much, and we promised to let them know by dinner. After breakfast, Fable and I went to the bank. We sat across from a woman at a small desk and opened a joint household account. We explained that the account would cover shared family expenses. The teller offered us a debit card and a small booklet for checks. I tucked them carefully into my purse. On the way home, we stopped at the grocery store and split the list down the middle. She picked out canned vegetables and milk, while I added oatmeal and dish soap. At the register, she pulled out her portion in cash. I handed over mine. The clerk didn't bat an eye. That afternoon, I unpacked my suitcase upstairs. I placed my clothes neatly in the drawers, hung up my warm cardigan, and returned the framed photo of Albert to the nightstand. The house was quiet. Denby had taken his bike to the library to finish a homework assignment. Lauren was coloring on the floor in the living room, humming softly. Fable stood at the sink, washing the few lunch dishes by hand. Around 4, I sat at the kitchen table and started writing a grocery plan for the rest of the week. Fable joined me, her notebook in hand. We calculated what we had left after today's purchases, what would be needed for school lunches, and when the next deposit would come in. "Feels strange," she said, tapping her pen. "Keeping track of every dollar." "It gets easier," I said. "You stop thinking of it as restriction and start thinking of it as clarity." She nodded slowly. "I never realized how much I didn't know. I just kept moving and assumed it would work out." We heard Denby come through the front door and drop his backpack in the hallway. "Internet's still out," he said, walking into the kitchen. "I did most of my assignment, but I need to email it in by tonight." "I'll call the provider tomorrow," Fable said. "We'll pay and get it restored by the weekend." He nodded and poured himself a glass of juice. "Okay." At dinner, we sat around the table and went over the final version of the family budget. Each of us would write down what we spent. Every receipt would go into a small folder on the counter. The kids listened quietly. Lauren asked if she could save her allowance for a doll she wanted. Denby asked if his covered school events too. We said yes to both. After dinner, while the kids helped load the dishwasher, Fable pulled me aside in the hallway. "You didn't have to come back," she said. "But I'm glad you did." "We made a deal," I said. She looked down at the floor, then back at me. "I'm going to do my part. I mean that." "I know." Later that night, when the kids were in bed, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cooler, still damp from the week's rain. Across the street, Humphrey's light was on. I could see him sitting in his usual chair, a book in his lap, the television glowing softly in the corner. Fable joined me with 2 cups of tea. She handed me mine and leaned against the porch railing. "I thought this would feel like starting over," she said. "But it doesn't." "No," she shook her head. "It feels like starting for real." I looked out over the quiet neighborhood. The street was still. The porch light cast a soft glow against the siding. I sipped my tea and didn't answer. We stood there for a long while, saying nothing. The first Saturday after I moved back in Fable woke early and made pancakes from scratch. Not from a box flour eggs, a little vanilla from the bottle in the back of the cupboard. She even sliced bananas and set them out on a plate. I watched from the kitchen doorway while she moved around the stove. The griddle sizzled. The house smelled like butter and cinnamon. At the table, the kids poured syrup without bickering. Denby had a soccer practice that morning. Lauren needed to finish a science worksheet. They ate quickly, wiped their mouths, and headed off to get dressed. Fable refilled my coffee and sat down across from me. "I've been thinking," she said, "about how we handle things moving forward. I want to keep the budget plan. I need it." We went over the numbers again. The bills had been paid that week from the new account. Everything matched what we'd planned. She showed me her notebook where she'd logged every dollar groceries, gas, even the $4 coffee she bought on Wednesday when her route ran long. In the living room, a small box sat near the front door. Inside were DVDs, a few old phone chargers, some costume jewelry. Fable had listed them on a local swap site. She said someone was coming later to pick them up. "I used to think the answer was just earning more," she said. "But now I see it's about how I spend what I already have." Around noon, after the buyer came and left with the box, we sat on the porch while the kids played in the front yard. Denby kicked a ball against the side fence. Lauren lay on a blanket with her crayons and a notebook. "I've made a list of things I can cut without the kids noticing too much," Fable said. "Cable's already gone. I'm downgrading my cell plan next month. And I'm looking at switching insurance companies. Might save $50. She wasn't talking about it the way she used to, not with panic or frustration. She sounded steady, calm, focused. That evening, while I folded laundry upstairs, I heard her talking to Denby in the hallway. "If you want to go to that overnight trip, we'll add it to next month's budget," she said. "But we can't just sign up without planning first. That's the rule now." Denby didn't argue. He asked how much it cost. She told him to look it up and write it down. When I came downstairs, the notebook was on the counter again. A new line added in blue ink: school trip deposit $60. After dinner, she handed each of the kids an envelope. Inside was their weekly allowance, small but consistent. Denby counted his quickly, then nodded and put it in his wallet. Lauren asked if she could buy markers this week or if she should save for the doll. Fable told her it was her choice. Later that night, after the dishes were put away and the lights dimmed, Fable and I sat in the living room with our notebooks. We didn't talk much, just worked. She tallied receipts. I sorted the grocery list by section: produce, dry goods, frozen. When she finished her totals, she flipped the notebook closed. "I never learned how to manage money growing up," she said. "Not really. It always felt like something that would work itself out." I didn't respond. She didn't expect me to. "I'm glad we're doing this," she added. "It's not just the numbers. It's knowing what's coming, that we have a plan." The next morning, she clipped a help wanted ad to the fridge with a magnet. It was for an evening cleaning shift at a small office park about 15 minutes away. She circled the pay rate and the hours. I saw her glance at it while she packed lunches that Monday morning. By midweek, she'd had her first interview. They offered her the job on the spot. She would start the following Monday, 2 nights a week, 3 hours per shift. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. That Friday, we updated the household account with the new pay schedule. She adjusted her grocery section down by $20 to balance the gas she'd need for the second job. That night, when the kids went to bed, I noticed she left the living room light on a little longer than usual. She sat with the TV off, flipping through an old photo album, a picture of her high school graduation, one from her wedding, a snapshot of Albert holding baby Denby at the county fair. I didn't say anything. I just passed her a blanket, filled the kettle, and turned down the rest of the lights. The routine was working. Not perfectly, but better than I expected. Each day had structure. Meals were planned. Shopping trips had limits. Even the children were adjusting. Lauren stopped asking for extra money. Denby started using the library more. The internet was back on, but the screen time was shorter, more purposeful. Still, I knew it was only the beginning. Habits don't break overnight, and I hadn't forgotten how quickly things had unraveled before. On Saturday morning, while we made a fresh pot of coffee, Fable hesitated near the counter. "I want to ask you something," she said, "but only if you feel comfortable." I looked up. "I was thinking, maybe we could write it all down," she said. "Not just the budget, the agreement, like a contract." I nodded. It would help me feel like this is real, like it's not just a phase. I agreed to help. We spent the next hour drafting it on the computer's simple language, clear expectations. We printed 2 copies. She signed hers first. Then I signed mine. We placed both in a folder labeled Family Budget Agreement. It went in the top drawer of the sideboard next to the mortgage file. That night over dinner, Denby asked if he could mow lawns over the summer for extra money. Fable said yes, as long as he handled it responsibly. Lauren showed me her allowance envelope. She'd saved for 3 weeks. The doll was still a few dollars away, but she was close. We ended the evening with tea and a new movie on one of the free channels. Fable sat on the floor with a calculator beside her and a grocery flyer in her lap. The first sign came on a Monday afternoon, just after 3. Fable's car pulled into the driveway like usual, but she didn't come inside right away. I watched from the kitchen window as she sat there a moment, still in uniform, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. She finally got out slowly, shoulders tight, and walked up the porch steps without looking up. She set her bag down by the door and took off her shoes. Her face was pale. "They cut my hours," she said quietly. "Down to 4 days a week, starting next pay period." I didn't say anything right away. The kettle was just beginning to hiss, so I turned off the burner and reached for the mugs. She sat down at the table, rubbed her temples with both hands, and looked down at the folder she'd been carrying. "It's not just me," she added. "Half the routes are getting hit. They said it's temporary, but there's no date, just less." The folder contained a printout of her new schedule, the updated hours, and a short note from her supervisor explaining the cutback. We recalculated the budget that evening. Groceries would need to shrink by another $20. Her evening job would help, but not quite enough. "I can't cancel internet again," she said. "The kids need it for school." We agreed to cut entertainment and move a few flexible expenses to next month, like Lauren's summer camp deposit and the cushion she'd been setting aside for car maintenance. 2 days later, the car battery died. I found her in the driveway, holding jumper cables, looking more tired than I'd seen her in weeks. Humphrey came across the street with his portable starter and helped get it running. "It's not holding a charge," he said after testing it. "You'll need a new battery. We priced replacements that night. Even the cheapest would eat through what little was left in the emergency column." "I can wait on the prescription refill," she said. "It's just vitamins anyway." That Friday, Denby came home with a permission slip for a field trip to the Science Museum. He'd been looking forward to it for weeks. The cost wasn't much, $12, but it wasn't in the budget. Not anymore. Fable pulled out her notebook, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the numbers for a long time. Then she reached for her wallet and opened the zipper pouch where she kept her cash. There were 2 5s and 3 singles. She placed them on the counter and turned toward Denby. "Okay," she said. "We'll make it work." She didn't eat lunch the next day. Said she wasn't hungry. But I saw the lunchbox she usually packed for work still sitting on the counter when I cleaned up. The following week brought more stress. The water bill came in higher than usual. We checked the meters, turned off appliances, and cut showers short. Still, the gap was growing. One evening, Fable returned from her night shift later than expected. The office had needed her to stay an extra hour. She looked exhausted, her uniform damp with sweat from scrubbing floors and emptying bins. She sat down at the kitchen table without taking off her shoes and rested her head in her hands. "I don't know how long I can keep this up," she whispered. We didn't talk much that night. That weekend I offered to cover groceries again, just this once, I said. She shook her head. "We made a deal," she said. "I don't want to undo everything just because it's hard." On Sunday afternoon, she pulled out the family budget agreement and reread it quietly at the dining table. Her finger traced the lines as if grounding herself in the rules we'd written together. Then came the final straw. The following Wednesday, Denby came into the kitchen looking pale. "I forgot to tell you," he said. "The field trip got moved. The money's due tomorrow now." Fable looked up from the calendar on the fridge. She checked the wallet. Empty. She opened the bank app. The next deposit wasn't until Friday. She looked at the calculator on the counter at the meal plan taped beside it at the receipt folder. She didn't say a word, just quietly grabbed her car keys and said she'd be back soon. When she returned, she didn't come through the front door. I heard the car door slam, fast footsteps across the porch, and the thud of something hitting the kitchen counter. I walked in to see her standing there holding a brown plastic shopping bag. Inside was a receipt for a payday loan, $75 borrowed against her next paycheck. The interest rate made my chest tighten. "I'll pay it off fast," she said. It was either that or tell Denby he couldn't go. That night, I heard her crying behind the bathroom door. Not loud, but enough. She hadn't cried in front of me since she was 13. The next morning, I made the kids breakfast and packed their bags while Fable took a call in the hallway. When she returned, she looked drained but calm. "I canceled the evening job," she said. "They wanted more hours." "I can't do more hours. Not without losing sleep. Or missing the kids." We sat at the table with the agreement again. She flipped to the back and added a note, "Temporary deviation approved for medical and family emergencies. Loan cap $100. Limit 1 per quarter. Must notify household committee." She signed it. I signed it. Then she turned to me and said something I hadn't expected. "I think we need outside help," she said. "Not money. Just someone to walk me through this. A real financial advisor. Or a credit counselor. Someone who's done this before." I nodded. The next day, she called the library and asked about local resources. They gave her a list of nonprofit services, including one that offered free financial coaching for single parents. She made the appointment. The financial coaching office was tucked behind the library in a squat brown building with peeling paint and a single window fan that rattled when it turned. Fable walked in, wearing her mail carrier uniform sleeves, rolled up a notepad under her arm. I waited in the car with a crossword book and a thermos of tea, watching parents wrangle toddlers into car seats and teenagers loitering near the vending machines. She came out 40 minutes later holding a folder and a yellow highlighter, her mouth set in a quiet line. We drove home without much talk, just the local radio humming under the sound of tires on pavement. When we pulled into the driveway, she turned off the engine and sat with her hands still on the wheel. "They said, I'm doing better than most," she said. but we're not out of the woods yet. That night, after the kids went to bed, we sat at the kitchen table and opened the folder together. Inside were a series of worksheets, one for monthly debt payments, another for budgeting tiers, and one titled Needs, Wants, and Whys. She'd filled them out in pencil, everything neat and color-coded. Groceries, utilities, debt snowball plan. She even had a page for long-term goals. She pointed to the last sheet. They had me write a statement of purpose, she said. It's for myself, not legal. Just something to read when I get discouraged. She slid the page toward me. It was written in her tidy, slanted print. I will not spend money I don't have. I will not guilt my mother into solving problems I created. I will raise these children with truth and dignity, not debt and fear. I will work the hours I can rest when I must and speak up when I'm drowning. This house is ours, but not at any cost. I choose clarity. I choose honesty. I choose peace. The next morning, she woke early and baked muffins with the kids before school. Nothing fancy, just box mix with frozen blueberries stirred in, but she made enough to freeze 2 batches. She labeled them with the date and a little smiley face sticker. On Saturday, she spent the afternoon scrubbing out the hall closet and reorganizing the pantry. She found expired cans, half-used baking powder, and 3 bottles of expired vitamins. She packed what was still good into categories, labeled the shelves, and created a no-waste chart for tracking leftovers. This'll help, she said. If we know what we have, we'll stop buying duplicates. On Sunday, she handed me a new version of our family budget agreement. This one had clear updates, emergency thresholds, spending limits, shared goals. She'd added clauses about shared childcare duties, financial disclosures, and even mental health breaks. I made copies, she said. One for the fridge, one in my binder, and one for you, in case you ever need to revisit it. I signed it. So did she. Later that week, she sent out emails to her kids' teachers asking about scholarships for field trips and waived fees for after-school clubs. She registered for a community night class on personal finance 12 weeks once a week at the middle school. The cost was free, sponsored by the local credit union. I'll need you to help with bedtime that night, she said. They gave me a workbook. Every evening I saw her with a highlighter and a notebook, sometimes with her laptop open, sometimes with a calculator in hand. The kids got used to seeing their mother in study mode. Lauren even offered to quiz her before the first class. A few days later, I walked into the kitchen and found a small envelope taped to the fridge. It was labeled Buffer Fund. Inside were 3 $5 bills and 2 singles. She smiled when she saw me holding it. First deposit, she said. We're going to start building a little cushion. I'm not touching it unless we absolutely need to. One afternoon, I came back from the grocery store and saw Denby sitting at the table with her pencil in hand, working on a page from her workbook. She was explaining compound interest with a diagram of a growing tree. He listened carefully, nodding along. He wanted to know how savings grow, she said when I walked in. So I showed him. That Sunday, we had our first monthly household meeting, something she'd scheduled in the new budget calendar. She made sandwiches, poured lemonade, and passed around little slips of paper for budget suggestions. Lauren asked for more fruit snacks. Denby wanted a new flashlight. I wrote down fewer cable channels, more reading nights. We voted on each one, talked through priorities, and adjusted accordingly. That night, after everyone went to bed, she sat on the porch with a notepad and a pen, looking out at the dark street. I didn't think I could do it, she said. I really didn't, but I think we're finally turning a corner. I didn't reply, just sat beside her as the breeze moved through the trees. The next morning, an envelope came in the mail. It was plain addressed to her in block letters, no return address. She opened it quietly, at the kitchen table. Inside was a note in her ex-husband's handwriting. 2 sentences. Heard about your new setup. If you're desperate enough to beg, you know how to reach me. She read it once, folded it back into the envelope, and slid it into the trash without a word. Later that day, she updated her emergency contact information at the school to list me instead of him. Then she pulled out the buffer fund envelope and added a $10 bill. She didn't say anything to the kids about the envelope. Didn't tell me either, not directly. But the next morning, she stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, smoothing down the sleeves of her church blouse, brushing out her hair with the kind of care you give something sacred. I asked if she wanted company at the courthouse, and she shook her head gently. I need to do this part on my own, she said. But I'd like you nearby. Maybe we meet for lunch after I waited at the diner across the street, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching the courthouse doors. When she finally stepped out, her stride was steady, her folder tucked tight under her arm. She walked across the lot like someone who knew exactly where her feet were going. She slid into the booth and opened the menu like we were meeting for a regular lunch on a regular Tuesday. Well, I asked. It's done, she said. I filed to make everything official. No more joint anything, no more door for him to walk back through. She stirred cream into her coffee slowly like it mattered. I even updated the title on the house, got the final paperwork signed. The clerk said most people cry when it's done. I didn't feel like crying, just relieved. That night, she pulled the kids into the living room for a family update. Denby brought his stuffed tiger. Lauren leaned into my shoulder while Fable sat cross-legged on the floor. So she began, "There's something you should know. From now on, it's just us. This house, this family, everything about it belongs to people who show up. That's what matters most. Not money, not names. Just love that stays." The kids didn't ask questions. They just nodded. And then, like it was the most normal thing in the world, Fable passed around popsicles from the freezer, and they all started talking about the science fair. Later that week, she added a final envelope to the box where she kept her binders and financial folders. It was labeled Peace of Mind. Inside were printed copies of her new will, the house deed, a letter to the kids, and a short note addressed to me. If anything ever happens to me, I want them to stay with you. You're the one who showed up. I sat with that for a long time, not because it scared me, but because I understood how much it cost her to trust again. The first spring we spent together as a new kind of family, she planted a row of lilacs along the fence line. The kids helped dig the holes. She showed them how to loosen the roots before setting each plant in the ground. When Denby asked why lilacs, she smiled. "They're strong," she said. "Even if you cut them back to the ground, they'll return. Might take a year. Might take 2. But they don't give up. They always come back." By summer, the buffer fund had grown to nearly $300. Not because of any big windfall, just slow, careful choices. She called it the Calm Fund, said it helped her sleep better, knowing there was something tucked away for a rainy day. And when her ex-husband sent a second note, this one, thinner, colder, she didn't respond. Just filed it away with the rest of the irrelevant things. One quiet evening, as the cicadas hummed outside and the house settled into its soft nighttime rhythm, she turned to me and said, "I used to think survival meant holding my breath. But it's not. It's breathing steady even when the world tries to shake you." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We're breathing now," she said. "If you've ever had to rebuild something that once felt broken, your trust, your home, your sense of peace, just know you're not alone." Share your story if you feel like it. And if this one stayed with you, maybe tap that heart or hit subscribe. Either way, I'm glad you're here.